So, your engine dies on you because your fuel filters or fuel lines get clogged. Maybe you went offshore for the first time and rounded that notorious cape. So what do? And what's the number one thing that boaters could do to prevent it? Stick around to find out.
Hey everybody, I'm Amber.
And I'm Peter.
Welcome to Sailing Asara.
My life's dream has been to sail the oceans and explore new places. We both quit our jobs to try a different lifestyle. And after a long break and some travel, we're back preparing the boat and doing some shakedown sails to get ready for sailing south. Yes, welcome back, and I also welcome myself back since we narrowly escaped, if not death, certain disaster in the last episode where we lost power due to fueling issues.
We almost died!
That was the third time I've lost power due to fueling issues, so now I'm ready to remake this boat to have the most reliable fueling in the entire marina. This episode, I invite you to hang out on the boat as I revamp the fuel tank, add a fuel polishing system, a fuel gauge, but crucially an extra special gauge that will tell me the status of the fuel filters while I'm in the cockpit. So this is a big episode, let's get right to it. So when you lose fuel on a dual filter setup, you might want to switch over the filters from one to the other. Previously on my boat, that would entail practically removing the entire aft berth and whatever's on top of it. So I created a filter cutout for much quicker and easier access. Unfortunately, I didn't have the tools or the brains to do a good cutout. However, I did create cover trim that, while a bit too red, works well enough. I also went from a 2-filter to a 3-filter system. I added a pre-filter for my main Raycor filter, and then I installed a fuel polishing system. A polishing system simply runs the fuel through the filters, even if your engine is off. I don't have any clips of it, but that's partially because it's so simple, a fuel pump, 12-volt wiring, and these Raycor filters already have extra inputs and outputs that you can tap into. I did use a combiner to combine the polishing return with the engine fuel return, which so far has proved reliable over 1,000 miles. Here's the fuel tank location. It's aft of the aft cabin and also accessible through the lazarette in the cockpit. Here's the mess we have to remove in order to remove the fuel tank. But first, because I'm an optimist, I wanted to look in the fuel tank to see if we could throw a Hail Mary and degunk the tank chemically. So I removed the old mechanical fuel gauge and had a look with the borescope. Well, all I can really tell is that it is indeed sludgy. And yes, we do really need to remove this tank. Okay, so do we think we have enough fuel filters? I hope so, because I feel kind of bad. I cleaned out West Marine, as well as ordering a bunch online. That, plus a few more back there. I did pour biocide into the tank, and you could see it working well here. It kills off the top layer of sludge, but as you can see, I have so much sludge, it doesn't penetrate more than a few millimeters. With a crazy amount of sludge built up in this tank, I don't want to leave anything to chance. So let's take out the tank. First, I can use the new polishing system to pump out the remaining fuel. Next, I have to remove everything above the tank so I could lift it out from the lazarette. And when I do, the whole contraption moves. I struggled taking out the natural gas tank, and I forgot that since we won't be using it, I could just cut it out.
That actually looked pretty good inside. Okay. Oh, you know what? I'm a retard. Or, sorry, a dumbass.
I'm happy to report that still today, this doohickey is still attached to this natural gas tank. The next step was to remove the autopilot. This part here is the rudder position sensor. There's the rudder quadrant.
All right.
And we have it removed.
Well, dropped one in the bilge. Easy as that. Okay, now to try to get this wood piece out.
These screws here were filled with paint, so I used a wire brush to Dremel them out to get purchase on them. I got them out, but there were more hidden screws, so unfortunately, we had to break something. But we got it.
We have a fuel tank.
Now we can finally pull out the tank.
It's actually pretty light.
As I was pulling out the tank, of course, I realized I forgot one last screw. And voila, it is out. Now let's bring it up to the house to work on it. So here's the old plywood piece that we removed, and here is the new piece, along with a cleaned up additional piece that goes next to it. And also I created a new floor for the V-berth storage area. So I used marine ply and I painted them all with this Valspar Season Flex acrylic paint, which I can happily report has been very durable. Now back to the boat for a test fit.
All right. It is installed. And look at that. That is so beautiful. I did clean the sides a little bit. Not the hose, but I did clean all the sides. Fits perfectly, in fact even better than the other one. It'll be easier to come out if I ever need it to come out. There's no tank underneath it though. So we can fix that. Now we just gotta go clean the tank, reinstall it, and then Isara is almost good to go.
Okay, so here it is. The tank is ready for cleaning and blasting. I decided that the only way to do this was to create 2 large access holes on the top of the tank. But before you take a look at what an old fuel tank looks like on the inside, I advise you to sit down and brace yourself.
All right, got the holes cut and deburred. And there you go. How did this thing run with the pickup tube like that? Oh, yeah, look at that. Yeah, very interesting science experiments going on here.
So I somehow lost video of it, but long story short, I cleaned the tank, I sandblasted it multiple times, and then I gave it a generous 2 coats of epoxy glass. I used something called Max GRE gasoline resistant epoxy, and then I gave it a coat of acrylic paint, which should help me see any stains or leaks. Now, before you say anything, I did read plenty of how people say, hey, you can't repair an aluminum tank with epoxy. However, I would argue that I've actually created 2 tanks, aluminum on the inside and a fiberglass one around the outside. I'm comfortable that this fix will last multiple decades, and if it doesn't, I'll report back.
Wow. It's crazy. I've never seen it this red or this orange before.
All right, guys, I am back at the boat here, and just a nice, beautiful, cloudy fall day here in the San Francisco Bay. In addition to the other plywood pieces I made, I created a plywood shelf for the aft cabin. To me, the cabinet storage on this boat seems a little bit more fit for a day sailor than the long distance, long-term cruising that we're planning on doing. And this is, I want to say, oak. It is very, very stiff. So let's see how it fits, or if it fits. Since the back of this is the hull. No way. Oh, look at that. That's like super perfect. I'll just level it a little bit. Here we are with the shelf. I put a plywood covering over it to act as a stopper for when the boat is leaning. And then we have a light on the side so you can see inside. While the tank was out and I had more space, I took the opportunity to install a 60 amp battery charger that I had already marinized with conformal coating inside. Then I set up the rubber mounting base for the tank. I modified the previous rubber fittings to fit the tank better. So here is where the fuel tank will be installed. The next step is to fill all the old plywood mounting holes with epoxy. After filling them, I tape them to help push the epoxy in and keep the wood flat. And now, we can finally install the tank. Okay, well, aside from dropping it, there it is. You know, if I ever need to redo this tank, I'll probably just make an integral tank out of glass epoxy, since there's so much space on all sides of the tank. I think I could easily gain 50 to 70% more tankage if I did that. So now I just need to go look at the damage I did when I dropped the tank. Oh yeah, light is all weird with this, but this tab is bent, so that sucks. I was able to bend this tab back a little and added more epoxy to it. Now I need to fasten the tank. So there's a tab right here. I think that if I hook that up, then the rest of it should fall into place. Okay, and since I had some extra epoxy to use, I decided to fill a gouge on this cockpit seat that has been bothering me since I've owned the boat. You can see a previous repair on it over here. So first I cut out this floppy bit of gel coat, and then I add epoxy to it. Let that sit for a few days. And then the last step is to put some painter's tape over it to help hold the epoxy in shape as it cures. And I didn't video it, but I got one more here. Okay guys, so here's a fun one. How do you torque down a floating bolt single-handed? So you need access to both sides, but you're only one person. Some of you who have done this type of gritty work before might be able to appreciate this tedious ballet. Twist the bolt, walk all the way over to the other side, fix the locking pliers, rinse and repeat. I did get the bolt in, but it was truly a test of patience and determination. Alright, it has taken hours, but I have the fuel tank in. I was able to get this bolt in. I even got the fuel intake line on, so that's pretty incredible. Just need to get the hoses on, the overflow hose and the barbs on over there. I got the plates on and the fuel tank sensor in, the gauge. So I need to test this. And I'm so happy, but like normal, I gotta get going. Time to clean up everything. Let's get going. Okay, so we have the tank installed. I also tested the new electronic fuel tank gauge. We'll be installing that last. Next, we can screw down the plywood cover plate, chamfering the holes nicely, and we don't paint over the screws, so we can remove it in the future. Okay, it is now screwed in. All my freaking handprints are everywhere. But man, that is so solid. Like you could hear that reverberating throughout the whole boat. And then finally, reinstall the autopilot. And there it is, job done. Okay, now for our penultimate fix, we have something special, and that would be a fuel vacuum gauge that will be visible in the cockpit. Now, it's common to have one of these, as you can see here on our boat, but it's hidden away somewhere. And while that's better than nothing after losing power 3 times due to fueling, I want that gauge visible at all times while I'm motoring the boat. So here's the gauge that I'm installing. It goes from negative 14.5 psi to 30 psi. Then it spits out a voltage which represents what psi it's reading. I'm going to simply monitor the output voltage, and by cross-referencing that with a chart, I will know what vacuum pressure the filters are at. The first step was to screw in the sender and run a wire from that location to the binnacle in the cockpit. Top tip that I've never heard before: in order to slide heat shrink across clumps of difficult cable connectors, dielectric grease is magic. And there we go. So then we need to route the cable. I've routed it from this location in the engine compartment, down beneath the aft berth, up near the rudder post, and through the lining to the binnacle, which I sealed with my favorite butyl tape. Now we just need to find the cable sticking out in the binnacle. Okay, so let's use the grab and hope method. With deference to Donald Trump, we just need to hook up this voltage converter, since the transducer uses 5 volts. So this will convert the 12 volts down to 5 volts. I decided to do the voltage conversion in the binnacle to avoid the engine heat, and added 1/10 of a volt to account for the voltage drop of the 15-foot wire. So here's the graph for the vacuum gauge. As you can see, about 1.8 volts represents 0 psi. So when we power this up with the engine off, we should see something close to 1.8 volts. After hours of wiring and false starts, we're finally ready to test it. Oh, there it is. 1.80. Oh my god. That's exactly what I was expecting to measure. Guys, can you see that down there? That 1.80? That is the voltage output exactly that I would expect. The drink tastes even better with success. Next, we need to install the voltage display somewhere in the cockpit. I chose this tiny display because it's standardized and easily replaceable. On the instrument panel, I found a blank spot covered by a rubber plug. So I drilled 2 holes, and voila! Perfect fit. Now I just needed to find something to cover it later. In the middle of all this mess, I took a few minutes to recrimp some connections for the light in the aft cabin, and voila! The light and the fan, which hadn't been working since I bought the boat, now worked. So now that we have this installed, let's go over how it works. Unfortunately, due to technical reasons, or magic depending on your belief system, the actual readout of the display doesn't work on the video camera. But I'll summarize it here. After sitting for a while, the vacuum reads 1.82 volts. This represents 0 vacuum. When running, I'll see it anywhere from 1.6 to 1.8 volts, corresponding to maybe 0 to 3 psi of vacuum. One thing that I didn't expect was that I'll actually see more vacuum when the fuel tank is more empty. Here, I test a fuel line clogging mode of failure by closing both fuel filters. Okay, I just turned off both filters. We previously were on just the main, And look at that, down to 1.22 and dropping. So let's get that guy back on. Bam, 1.75. All right, certainly looks like it's working. Okay, to wrap up this project, we have this little guy. On the right, that is. It's a pre-cut plexiglass base for a figurine. The stuff you can find online these days is endless. After a few fails and cracking some while drilling it, I installed the cover with dielectric grease for a watertight and removable cover. And we are done. And last but not least, a real fuel gauge in the cockpit. Previously, to check how much fuel I had remaining, I'd have to open up the lazarette, remove whatever junk was in there, get a flashlight, and peer through that little hole at the mechanical gauge to know how much fuel I had left. It's time for an electronic gauge. First, I used a burning butane torch right next to the fuel tank to solder up the connections. Then I opened up the binnacle, taped over the gel coat, and drilled, and killed my drill battery.
There we go.
After a repower, we have our gauge mounted.
Hey, look at that.
I wire it up, dremeling out the bus bar to get a good electrical connection. And finally, we have a fuel gauge. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? That is so exciting for me. I also took this opportunity to swap out an outdated old electrical plug for a new 12-volt plug here. While I was working on this project, I found out that the only electrical wire feeding all the instruments in the binnacle was a tiny 20-gauge wire. That was crazy, so I went ahead and replaced that with a 10-gauge wire. Alright guys, what an episode. As you may have guessed, we're quite a ways behind in the videos, but we're finally catching up. Looking back, I can truly say that the fixes that I did here have been transformational for our boating lives, especially in and around crowded areas. And if you have any feedback about them, definitely let me know in the comments below. So now, as we get this boat ready for Baja, we have more prep work to do, some shakedown sailing with crew around the bay, plus a renaming ceremony of the boat. So I hope to see you there. Until then, fair winds in your sailing and your lives. Cheers.